Today, I would like to welcome you all in this lecture, and this lecture would be Unit 9. And in this unit, we are tackling and discussing the question of democracy and Islam. And where is the position of democracy and the democratic thought in the Islamic culture, Islamic law, Islamic debate, Islamic scholarly debate as well. And this would become in line with Islam and modern politics, as democracy considered as one of the modern thought or modern political thought. And we have witnessed and still of course witnessing a very serious debate among the Muslim scholars, among the Muslim politicians, and among the Muslim academics as well. In the question of democracy, we usually find ourselves facing different dimensions related to the question of democracy. One of them is about the compatibility of Islam and democracy. Some of them related to the fitness of democracy in the Islamic thoughts, whether it's coming in the same line with the Quranic teaching, it's coming with the same line in the Islamic political culture, or it's opposing all these aspects. And we have to remember all the time that the Western democracy in principle is almost adopting the same aspects, the same perspectives, but when it comes to the implementation, it has something different to do from country to another. So the way how they implement the American democracy in America, in the USA, is completely different from the democracy they implement in Europe. And in Europe itself, we would find different European countries developing and implementing their own democracy. But of course, you have different principles to talk about democracy as a common sense when it comes to the Western political culture, related to the human rights, related to the equality, related to the freedom of speech, related to the space and the room given for the citizens, related to the justice system, to the judicial procedures, related to the parliamentarian practices, and so on. So we would in fact consider that democracy as a concept is almost the same, which is directly related to the human rights and to the space given to the people and the citizens to practice their life and to progress in their life. But in the same time, we would consider the way and the procedure and the implementation of putting this democracy into practice would be different. Would this make any kind of difference when it comes to Islam? This is something we have to consider and we have to discuss thoroughly. Different schools within the Islamic mainstream opposing of course the democracy and consider this democracy as a Western product, and of course because they oppose anything coming from the West or produced in the West according to their claim and argument, it wouldn't be accepted, especially that the democracy would affect directly the Islamic way of thinking, which would affect the Islamic values. So they say it, in fact, downgrade the Islamic values, and the community would lose its Islamic identity. So it is the discussion about the identity and how the identity would be gained and built with the time, when we have this clash between the democracy as a Western product and Islam with different thought, with different way of thinking, with different way of life, because the lifestyle is very much affected by the democracy and the democratic values. Others, they have, within the Islamic political thinkers, they have different view. They say that democracy, it could be in fact compatible with the Islamic thought, because we don't have any direct or indirect indication in the Quranic teaching saying that democracy wouldn't work within the Islamic community. And it doesn't mean if it's coming from the West that Muslims wouldn't be able to tackle this kind of practice within the community and to have it as part of their lifestyle. The other argument related to the democracy and Islam, that many of them, they say that if it comes to the freedom, Islam is given very wide space for the freedom. If it comes to the human rights, theoretically Islam gives a lot of space as well and room for the human rights, and it could be even very much into favor to give more rights to the people, to the citizens, to the human in general. And it could easily come in the same line with the democratic or the modern democratic values. And looking into the history of democracy, we would find that democracy relatively is a modern concept even within the Western communities, because it didn't really start since ever, although it was argued for or by many of the political scholars that democracy was very well established since the Greek community practiced this. And our argument is different, because democracy at that time was limited within a specific class. Not all the people would be able to exercise the democratic choices, as it is just related to the masters or to the high class in the community. So it wouldn't be called, maybe it is partly would be considered as democratic practice, but in the same time democracy wouldn't really prohibit the people or limit the people or the class of people who could practice this democracy. In the same time, when we have the democracy, when we have the fact that the democracy emerged almost after the First World War, we have to consider that the colonialism started in the Middle East and started in the Muslim countries. So in this case, we have to be very realistic when we say that democracy or democratic values wouldn't be able to progress within the Muslim communities, because simply the Muslim communities didn't have enough opportunity or real opportunity to observe the democratic values, because democratic values were just practiced in the West, and it wasn't a complete democracy as we know it nowadays, as we experience it nowadays. The experience of the Muslim communities in Asia, in Africa, in the Middle East was very bad, from the fact that the people who were promoted the democracy were abusing the democratic values in imposing the occupation, in having colonial and Orientalist approach with regard to the people under occupation or under the colonial forces. So in this aspect, we wouldn't be able to decide, because when you look into Europe and the European history, we wouldn't find really that the democracy just were smoothly progressing in the community. But the values were developing as they were progressing side by side with many different aspects in their lifestyle. The political system was gradually developing, and it took tens of years, like it took decades, until they got to this stage where they can claim that we have a proper democratic practice and we can promote the proper democratic values, which is usually related to the human rights. And if we look into the history of democracy in the USA, we would find the same problems occurring and the same questions raised with regard to whether they did have the democracy as we witness nowadays since decades, or it was gradually evolving from time to time. And this, in fact, usually would be a difficult question to answer, because still many people across the world would accuse the Western democracy or the American democracy as working just within the American community, but it's not really the case with the other countries that the Americans are preaching in democracy and promoting the democracy, where we have a lot of abuses of the democratic values, like talking about the recent reports related to the torturing the prisoners, to all kind of abuses of the human rights, and preaching many different aspects related or promoted as democratic values or American democratic values. In the same time, when we are discussing the Muslim communities and their relation with democracy, we have to be aware that when the Muslim countries and the Muslim states got independent, they kept that strong relation with the Western countries, like America, Europe in general, like Britain, USA, and France, and Spain, and Italy, many different countries, Germany as well. But and the relation wasn't really that relation would make the Muslim communities happy about, because simply it looked like that the Western democracy is supporting the dictatorship in their countries, where those dictatorships and dictators, they were all the time abusing any kind of values related to the democracy. So the people believe that there is strong abuse, and there is a strong promotion of the hypocrisy rather the democracy, because they were promoting the Western values, the Western democratic values, but in the same time supporting the people who are abusing this kind of values every single day. And this is in fact continued for decades. So for many Muslims, whether they are moderates or extremists, they didn't believe that the promotion of the democracy by the European or the Western countries would be really as reliable or convincing to them, because they are supporting the abusers of the democracy. So many people, they believed, yes, it's working for the Western, within the Western system, but what we are seeing, it's about protecting their interest and not paying any attention to the democracy and democratic value in the Muslim countries. If we go a bit further about the implementation of democracy, we would find that many different Muslim countries and community did in fact comply with the democratic values, especially when it comes to the election. We would find, for example, Indonesia, we'll find Turkey, we'll find Malaysia, we would find Iran, we would find countries like Palestine, Lebanon, if we want to say it is in the Muslim region and they have significant number of Muslims. So democracy as a tool, as an instrument, in fact, focusing here on the election and how to get to the power and how they succeeded, but Pakistan as well, they have this kind of democracy and the free election and in fact accepted widely in the West and in Europe. But when it comes to the Algerian example, for example, and again to the Palestinian pattern of election, when the Islamists won the election, it was widely refused and condemned even by the West and by the European democratic countries. So you would imagine that there is two phases, which usually something would look very awkward when it comes really to the communities and the Muslims' attitude of the modern democracy promoted by the West. Many different topics to be taken, and the question, which is a serious question, I think, do the Muslim communities and Muslim countries have to adopt the same or the exact example of the Western democracy, or they have to choose their own democracy? If we take the democracy from its main value, which is related to giving the proper space, the proper freedom for the people to express themselves and to choose. And this, in fact, has to be considered as a very serious issue, because you can't just bring, like the British democracy wouldn't certainly work in the American system. The American system wouldn't certainly work with the French system, because every political entity has different cultural, political, social, economic aspects, which let's say make the people design their own way of governance. So designing this kind of system needs, in fact, to be looked at more seriously than just taking the Western democracy as it is. And here the question would be whether you take the American example of the democracy, or you take just or the European, of course. And if European, which kind of country are you gonna to follow? The royal countries, or the countries where they have this kind of prime minister as the main political leader, or the president, or so we have to think more about what kind of democracy we are talking about before we say just the democracy blindly should be implemented in the Muslim countries. And from my own view, democracy would fit the Muslim countries, because according to the experience, the practical experience, when it was given the proper environment, the people welcomed that and they did exercise the democracy. Although the democracy doesn't come by sudden, or it doesn't come just because some outsiders or some other states, external states or external forces wanted to impose the democracy. If we are talking about the democracy as political system, as as a value, we have to think more how this democracy could be implemented in every single country, especially that the system of the values in those countries are completely different from the values in they might of course be joining a lot of values, especially when it comes to politics, but certainly religiously and socially is different. But the concentration should be on the value and to see what kind of democracy could fit every single country separately. We can't just say the democracy should be implemented without any limitations, because apparently, as I said, you can't really implement the European democracy in the American political system. You have to reconsider different aspects and different factors to be able to design like a proper form of democracy, to consider of course different developments and values in the community. And no one would say that the values should be in fact different and the values should be just shifted from a specific background to adopt a new background. And this is where many things would go wrong. I'm pretty sure that the French values are different from the British values or English values. The same about the American values. I'm talking about religious, social values, economic values even would be different. So if we consider these things, we can't just talk about democracy or implementation of democracy as a rigid concept and implementation. These are the main topics we would like to have discussion upon, to see whether democracy would be really welcomed, acceptable, and whether would be like supporting a productive community, a productive political regime, or it's just really about this double-faced policies where you'll find the biggest democracies in the world just supporting the dictatorship because it saves and preserves their interest, and in the other on the other hand, you would find the same democracies or democratic countries opposing the democratic choices of the people in specific communities, because democratic values here would be working against the interest of those countries. And of course, I'm happy for further discussion and further questions.
Thank you very much for the information you've provided. I have two questions that are fairly linked to each other. Firstly, do you think that Western democracy would work in Islamic countries if it was tailored to the Islamic countries' specific needs? And secondly, in my view, the Islamic countries have two options. The first option is for democracy to be provided by the West.
Mm-hmm.
And the second option is for these Muslim countries to be left for the people of those countries to decide what kind of system they want to be run by.
Mm-hmm.
Like for example, in Iraq, we saw that the American influence on the country Previously, for example, Saddam Hussein, when he was in power, until the first Gulf War, when the Americans were against him, but prior to that, the Americans had supported him, and for that reason, and because the Sunni minority in Iraq were in power, the Shia were not happy about it. And now, when the Americans occupied Iraq in 2003, and they brought the Shia into power, the Sunnis are not happy about it. So it appears that if the West are influencing decisions in a specific country, there will always be a group of people who are not happy about it. So what is to be done about this?
Well, we have to be realistic. I am actually related directly to the school of reality. Theoretically, it looks really very entertaining and very comforting and convincing when we say democracy and democratic values. But we forgot directly that every single community has specific needs to be met, and every single community has different aspiration to be achieved as well, and every single community as well has an explanatory model to be inspired from, so all these theories about democracy and how democracy could make or establish this significant shift in the community's lifestyle, theoretically are very beautiful, very nice, and it could take you to dream even all the time about flourishing future, about a stable community, about social coherency, and so on. But we always just forget that first of all we have to understand what is the need of the people before we start to implement something against their will. And I can assure you, many Muslims, Arab, Middle Eastern communities wouldn't feel happy with the democracy as it is promoted. For the people, in fact, they promote the democracy if the democracy, or they would accept the democracy if the democracy providing them with justice. And this is what was wrong, in fact, in Iraq, as you mentioned Iraq as a specific example. The Iraqi model, when the Sunni minority was taking over, ruling the country, they didn't have this kind of justice system to provide the equality or to get the people convinced by the equality between the citizens. So some citizens were treated as second class, and some citizens were favored by the regime or by the political regime. And in here, whether you have election or you don't have election as the main tool of exercising the democracy, it wouldn't matter for the people, because the people are lacking of justice. They are looking really for justice. And the same nowadays, when you have the Shia majority, they are not treating the Sunni minority equally. They don't really deal with them or treat them as like equal citizens. In this is where the people are not happy about. Although the new team, the new regime is fully elected by the Iraqis, but the equality is not there. The justice is not there. And this is what I would imagine in many different experiences, whether in Iraq, whether in Iran, Saudi Arabia, Indonesia, Malaysia. In Indonesia, by the way, we don't hear that much. It is the biggest population-wise, it's the biggest Muslim community geographically and demographically when it comes to like the percentage of Muslims. We have very high percentage. The vast majority are Muslims, and they exercise the democracy, and whoever comes to the power comes by the election. And we don't really hear that much of argument about this. It seems to be the democracy is working and the people are happy about this. It seems to be to some extent that the people enjoying some kind of equality, justice, and although they have different religious minorities as well. Malaysia would be considered the same. Maybe not ideal, but it seems to be progressing. And this is what happened exactly with Turkey, which is now declining from that position as an Islamic or Muslim democratic community, because the ruling party is now like using this democracy to like to suppress other political minorities or the political opposition, which in fact like affecting the people in a very negative way, where the people, they are enjoying the economic improvement and development. The growth is very great. When it comes to the economic and financial ranking on the global level, they are occupying a very good position, and they are progressing. But the people started to fear that the justice and the real democratic values of giving the people the choice to speak out, to express themselves, are getting just lower and lower. And this is where we have some suspicion. So it is really about the justice. If the people feel that all of them under the rule of law, and this is where the people would stick to democracy, would welcome the democracy rather. But if the democracy is gonna to bring them a lot of troubles, a lot of social and political chaos, they wouldn't really welcome this kind of democracy. This is where the people and the political regimes and the political parties have to intervene and to consider that if they can build and establish a just community from many different aspects, of course, they would be able to succeed in promoting the democracy in the proper way.
I have another question. To what extent do you agree with this statement that the superpowers such as America and Russia, and including Europe, they are the biggest influences on political systems in the Islamic world and also in the whole of the world? Mm-hmm. Whether you like it or not, the political system in any country is going to be influenced by one of these three powers. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So do you think that the only way that the Islamic countries can break away from any of these three superpowers influences is if they become a superpower themselves, and that is when they will be able to reach their own version of democracy without any outside interference?
Well, Malaysia is not a superpower.
But you can't say Malaysia, to some extent, even if it's a little bit, they do have maybe some American or European influence, even if it's just a little
They
bit?
do. No country, I mean, Russia has some influence over Germany, in fact. To some extent. They have influence on most of the Eastern European countries, for example.
But for example, America doesn't have any influence from outside, or Russia doesn't have any influence from outside.
Yeah, because simply they have.
Because they are superpowers.
That's right,
Yeah.
but I would. Well, China is a superpower, but they don't really have anything related to the democracy, and they don't pretend, and they don't really try to convince the other nations that we are a democratic country and we have democratic value, or we are promoted. They are not pretending that, and they are a progressing country. We don't know what is the future of democracy in China, but I don't see really democracy is implemented soon in that country. So is it because? But India is getting in this direction to become one of the superpower economically and maybe from the military point of view, and it seems to be very much into the democratic values and the promoting democracy and facing some difficulties, but they are progressing in this direction. Now, saying that the Islamic countries has to be superpower, this is would be very much related really to economic, financial, military or militarian aspects of the sovereign countries like China. As I said before, they have all these capacities, but they are not willing to be democratic. In a way or another, if you look into the Gulf area, for example, they have a lot of resources. They have human resources, they have financial resources, they have open natural resources, but they are not into this mood due to different facts. They think that the royal regimes are the best to serve their people, and apparently their people are happy about this. We don't find that much argument. From time to time we hear some cases about breaching the human rights, talking about the freedom of speech and press and this and that, but in the same time we find that the native people of those countries are not raising voices, because they are saying we are happy to what we get. We don't want to argue about the democracy, and even if you discuss with just regular citizens, really, sometimes they would oppose the democracy and the democratic value from many different perspectives. They say we are happy as we are. So we have to consider many different factors, whether if they become superpowers, they will be able to build their own model of democracy. I don't know whether would be this is the case or not. Well, Iran is a regional superpower, and they did build, or they can argue that we are the very well established democracy in the Middle East, because we have the constitution. We are following the constitutional rules. We have regular election, frequent election, and this election is related to the presidency, is related to the parliamentarian members, and so on. So in a way or another, they can argue strongly that, and the regime is stable, and all what we are suffering is the external intervention in our own sovereign affairs and sovereign issues. So before they become a regional superpower, they build their own democratic model according to their claim. And in fact, if you look into the case, they are one of the very few countries in that region having this regular election from, like regular election every 4 years for the presidential position and the parliamentarian members. So it's very difficult to say whether they can build their own democracy while they are just establishing normal countries, or they need to be like strong countries before and after that to build their own democracy.
Do you think that democracy is subjective or objective? For example, let's just say in a country in the Gulf, a Sunni citizen, he might see the system as democratic. Maybe if he was to apply for a position as a minister or prime minister or whatever, he can get the job. He doesn't have barriers or restrictions upon him. So he would find it as for him a democracy. Whereas, for example, a Shia citizen would find it an oppressive regime. If we take another example, for example, in Iran, the Shia, he might find himself as living in a democratic country because he can apply for posts, etc. Whereas the Sunni minority, he might think otherwise. He might think, because I'm a Sunni, I cannot become a president or a prime minister.
So you are coming in fact to the same point, the same square I have pointed out just earlier, saying if there is a systemic justice implemented in the community, I mean applying the proper understanding of the citizenship concept, the people would be happier about this. All the people, whether they are coming from religious minority or social minority or working minority, whatever. I mean, whatever the class we are talking about. Although in the democracy, you can't really just think classes everywhere. In fact, social classes, economic classes, and this kind of discrimination. And we have this serious issues nowadays is occurring once again in the American community, where you have like the black people thinking that democratic value are not there. In fact, it is theoretically well established there, but when it comes to the implementation, you'll find that the black people are oppressed and the democratic values don't work for them. So and they started to raise again something related to the justice system and the judicial system, whether they are really treated in justice way, or they are in fact treated in in this racial way of discrimination. So the question is still alive even in a very advanced democratic countries. But I believe when you go to the Scandinavian countries, for example, you don't have this kind of issue, because I think their justice system is reaching its peak level of making or establishing this kind of balance in the justice system, where all the people, the citizens, take the concept of the proper concept of the citizenship, which of course result with the equality, with freedom of speech, with freedom of press, and so on. So these kind of things, wherever you have more justice, it means more stable community. If you don't have this justice, you would find these voices raising all the time, talking about the lack of justice, and of course this will result racial, economic, and social or class discrimination in general.
So do you think that democracy is subjective? For example, let's just say in England, for example, you might find that there is democracy in England. Whereas, for example, I might disagree. I might say to you, there's no such thing as freedom of speech. Or like you gave an example of America where the black people don't, some of them might not see there to be a democracy in America, even though President Obama is black himself. Whereas the white people, they might see that there is democracy. So isn't that subjective? That even in the same country, some see it as democracy, whereas some people don't.
True, but we have to consider. I mean, I totally agree with your argument from this perspective. But we have to agree upon another thing, that you have shared value where most of the people, vast majority of the people would feel comfortable about. They would take it in one uniform understanding, and this is not the case, by the way, in between the black and white people as it was happening in South Africa. In fact, you would have, in Egypt, for example, you have different case when it comes to the democracy, because they did have election, if like in the last 2-3 years, the 3-4 elections. But in the same time, the people feel that the discrimination is coming from the working class, yes, and the wealthy people who are controlling the whole economic aspects of the country. So they feel that the justice is missing, and they will consider the democracy as a practical way of ruling the country or governing the country if they are treated justly when it comes to their work and working positions and so on. So it differs from one to another. But if we have like a system gives the people equal opportunities to access for job, to access for business, to establish their own life, yes, and to be like able to flourish and to improve financially, which would affect social aspects and so on. So this will be even when it comes to education, if all the people really they would have more access, so more people would be coming to the line where they can understand the democratic value almost in the same way. You can't really have just typical understanding of but it has to come to a very high percentage of understanding of the like different level and different aspects of democratic values.
Thank you very much.
Not at all. Thank you. If there is any question, I am happy to do that. But I see you are smiling, so we will have to continue the discussion with, inshallah, the next unit in the next week. Thank you for coming, and thank you for your time.
Thank you very much.
Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum.